Bryson Gordon, News in Advance, joins us. I think a lot of times when they see this story by Ben Case or by Bryson Gordon, in your case, people wonder, who is he? So kind of give us a little bit of your background and resume, if you will. And if somebody said to you, who is Bryson Gordon? What do you say?
That's fun. Yeah, I'm most proud of being a sports reporter at the News in Advance. So if somebody says who is Bryson Gordon, I would probably say a sports writer. Most importantly, just because I'm proud. I think it's a fun job to have, and I think doing it in Lynchburg is exciting. So a little bit about me. I moved here about, like I said, 4 years ago in 2021, and I just kind of moved here looking for a job in the newspaper industry. I was actually going to go get my master's at Liberty, before I moved up here, I worked at the Greensboro News and Record, which is where I'm originally from, which is under the same parent company as the News in Advance. And so whenever I moved up here, I had the opportunity to get my foot in the door at the News in Advance, kind of fresh out of college at that point, just a year after graduating. I graduated in the middle of COVID, so the job market was insane, as you can imagine. And then so landed at the News in Advance. I got my start in journalism actually covering Campbell County. So it's so much different from the job I do now on a day-to-day basis, right? I used to go to board of supervisors meetings, used to go to school board meetings and all that kind of stuff, and have to sit there and endure those long nights. And then it transitioned from there into a city council position. So I probably most of my coverage at the News in Advance before sports was on Lynchburg City Council, which is where I would say that a lot of my favorite coverage had come from, just because of the drama that went on that group. And I'm sure if you live in Lynchburg, you're more than well aware of that group. But I did that for a few years, and then I took a little bit of a break. It was a tough job, like I mentioned, and then wanted to do something else, and then had the opportunity to come back at the News in Advance in 2024. And I was so excited about it, right? I wanted to do it whenever I was working here the first time. I wanted to be able to work on the sports team. And at the time, Damien was here, and Damien did an unbelievable job. And then when he moved on to the Virginia Tech beat and some other openings came about, and it felt like it was a perfect, opportunity. I really, like I said, because of my history and living in Lynchburg and kind of having a grasp of Liberty, I've always kind of followed them. And so I didn't really start from, zero understanding of the program. And obviously, like I mentioned, with Damien's coverage and Ben's coverage in the year in between, whenever Damien stopped and whenever I picked it up, I think I started from a great base. And the News in Advance in general, I think there's a lot of really good writers in our building and that have come through that building in the past that really just, make me excited and make me proud about, having the opportunity to have this job.
Did being on the news side help you did it help you when you transitioned to the sports side? If so, how?
Absolutely. I think the part about news that most people don't understand is like it, it's honestly crazier than sports. Sports in a lot of ways is light. You cover news and you really learn how to you learn a lot about what real journalism is, right? You go to city. I was in so many courtrooms, right, observing court trials and writing about that. And so what I think the news part does is it really hones in on your skills when it comes to actually being a good reporter, being a good writer, building authority with your sources and making people know that you're someone they can come to, and all that kind of stuff. And in general, I think whenever you move from there from sports, it's easy because whenever you're in news, you're taught so much to like take out all of your tone in your writing. You're taught to write to a style, but in sports there is no style. In sports, you want to be exciting, you want to be colorful, you want to be entertaining, and I think that's what's been the most fun part about this. I love writing about news. I would do it again if I had the opportunity and was it was put on it. But I think just the thrill of telling a good sports story, it makes it so exciting. And I think there's a lot of crossovers, but it's something that definitely helps out at the end of the day for me.
So take me through, because that I've seen you a lot at high school baseball games or things like that. So if you're writing a story, you've got innings or you've got periods to take you through. You don't have that in the courtroom, or you don't have that at city council meetings. I mean, I know you got minutes, but it's not, the minutes of the meeting are not minute 1 to minute 6. This is what happened. So kind of take me through the differences real quick in terms of writing a news story. What are you hearing? What are you listening for? Are you trying to, I don't want to say play gotcha, but what are you doing at a courtroom or at a city council meeting?
Yeah, a lot of times, in my court days, I think it was pretty interesting because you're sitting in this courtroom, right? And a lot of times you follow these cases from the beginning to the end, and so in general, you have a little bit of understanding as you keep going along. But I think towards the end, you're really just painting the picture of what you hear. I think that was what was most exciting about the court hearings is you're not allowed to have a voice recorder in there. You have in most cases just a pen and a notepad, and you write down what you hear, and when you get back to your laptop, you excuse me, you pour that out, into a story. And I think that's what makes court reporting so much more interesting than anything else. When I go to a city council meeting, like I said, you can go back and watch the minutes, you can go back and watch parts of the notes. I think the part that makes city council meetings interesting is the dynamics between a lot of the people. And in Lynchburg, it was so fascinating because we had, not to dive too deep into politics, but we had, a Republican Party majority, and for they didn't necessarily get along, and so it was interesting to see the personal relationships between a lot of people kind of unfold on the dais. And it turns into interesting stories because in general people don't usually think about that stuff in politics, but it kind of spills out. And so when you go to a sporting event, I think most of the focus, as a matter of fact all of the focus actually, is what's on the field. When you're in news, a lot of the focus is on people that are in the community, the people that would be quote unquote in the stands. You think about what's an impactful story in the news side? Well, maybe it's somebody who has complaints about somebody speeding in their neighborhood, or somebody has complaints about there being, potholes or garbage collection not coming to their neighborhood. That's what makes a good news story, is because you're working with people out in the community. You're working with people that are, have issues, and you can help them get, solutions to their issues. On the sports side, it's a lot different. Like I said, you're working with people who really want to read about the people that are on the field. And so you don't do as much of the man on the street interviews. I can't tell you the last time, whenever I was in news doing man on the street interviews at festivals and fairs and really trying to get a grasp of the scene. You don't do a lot of that kind of stuff, which is interesting because I was never a big fan of just, walking up to people and being like, hey, tell me about why you're here at this festival, tell me what brings you out. That stuff is difficult. I think in sports, it's easy to just jump in front of a coach and put a microphone in their face. So, working in news really, it helps build people skills. It helps build some boldness and bravery, and I think you need that kind of stuff whenever you come into this sports side.
And real quick, when you say man on the street, that is basically defined as like, why are you here? What are
Yeah,
you looking
basically, I
for? Yeah.
mean, yeah, you go to, I mean, here in Lynchburg, obviously, we have so many fairs and festivals.
Yep.
I think you just think about something that's going on downtown, downtown, right? They have they shut down the street, and we want to write about that. A good angle would be talking to people about why they're there. And so it's very interesting to walk up to people and hold your press pass out and be like, hey, I work for the newspaper. And then I didn't even know newspapers were still going, which is unfortunately something we get a lot of these days. We're very much still rolling. And you get a lot of that kind of stuff. And then you just have to ask them about why they're there, what brings them to Lynchburg. Is this something they go to? And it's funny. Like I said, it really breaks you out of your shell if that's something you have. I think if you're somebody who really wants to figure out how to, bust out of an introvert spell, or become somebody who can, talk to just anybody, try to be a journalist. I mean, like I said, you have to talk to people. You can't be an introvert and take this job.
What'd you want to do when you were a kid?
I had no idea when I want. I mean, I wanted to be obviously an athlete for
Hmm.
so long. I was never big enough nor skilled enough, or athletically talented enough to make it past high school. I played basketball, played baseball, played soccer. We didn't have football at my high school, so I really just played soccer to stay in shape for basketball and baseball. But that was, the end of the road for me. And like I said, I really had no idea what I wanted to do, even when I went to college. I started college at a 2-year community college in North Carolina, Guilford Technical, and just kind of went there to get a transfer degree, just kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And I always had a general idea that I wanted to work in some form of sports. I grew up obviously reading the newspaper. That was always such a big thing for me on Sunday mornings. I always went to church with my family. And before then, the most important thing, would say, other than church, before then, was, coming downstairs, eating breakfast, and reading the Sunday
Yep.
newspaper, because, I was obviously at school, Monday through Friday. Didn't have the chance to do that. Saturday, I was playing in a Saturday league game or playing baseball. So Sunday was like, that was my newspaper day. I want to read this, want to see the MLB standings, all this kind of stuff. That was all my favorite things. And so I, always had this little bit of a foundation that, I love storytelling, and I always really got captive. I really got captivated through it in college. I had a great professor who actually taught political science, believe it or not. It was a media political science class, who kind of, caught my attention on a lot of things. Whether it comes to when it comes to media. which kind of opened a lot of doors for me. And I had a lot of excitement about writing, and what that led to was just a passion for writing about sports and telling people stories. I've had some experience on radio. I'm not the best at it, which is why some of these podcasts, I do some podcasts and radio stuff. But at the end of the day, I find myself just enjoying the writing part so much because I think, I'm biased, but I think that's the best way to tell a story. And I think people that have podcasts and have radio shows would disagree with that.
Right. Well, it's different. It's different, and that was going to bring me to kind of my next question. You talked about the newspaper industry is still rolling along, but I know I know you're not like a 40-year grizzled veteran or anything, but how much do you kind of have to keep evolving? Because let's be honest, the newspaper industry is probably not what it was when young Bryson's reading the paper on Sunday morning before church.
Right, and that was, just to be honest, I'm 28 years old, so that wasn't that long ago.
Right.
I was reading the newspapers in the mid 2010s, and just to think about the change from that point to where we are now, and then even from that point right into, let's say, 2010, from that point, from the 1990s, from that point to the 1980s, and on back, like, it's been a slow drip. And as somebody who grew up on newspapers, I think I'm probably one of the youngest people who grew up on newspapers. I think I am actually at the very end of that cutoff line, just because it comes to, I think whenever I was a kid, like, iPads were starting to become a big thing. The web was starting to become a big push, and that kind of led you away from, that print media. I think, like I said, I still keep a lot of my newspapers. I'm actually looking at across the room at a bin that I have a lot of my favorite childhood newspapers when my favorite teams won championships
Mhm.
when I was a kid. That stuff was so sentimental to me, and I think that's where the value of this industry still is. It's unfortunate, in my opinion, that I don't think a lot of people see it that way, which is why, in general, I think whenever I tell people what I do for a living, I don't think you can tell people you work necessarily just for the newspaper anymore. I think you have to, really embrace the multimedia facet of this. Like, you tell people you're a reporter, you tell people you're a journalist, because I think at the end of the day, limiting yourself to a newspaper is tough. I think there's going to be a day, whether it's in 5 years or 15 or 20 years, where they're all gone, where that concept is gone, at least, of a daily. And I think it's unfortunate, but I think the people that have been successful in this field, people that have continued to have success, are people that are, really really versatile, and are willing to be flexible in that stuff. And as somebody who grew up on newspapers and really loved it, I still see the value in that, but I also see the value in finding a way that would, help people digest the news better. Because I still think at the end of with the way that society is going, there's been a pull to go away from, reading as much news and consuming as much news, and I don't think that's a good thing for people. I think, we need to be informed citizens, just in general, whether it's sports stuff, whether it's news stuff. So I see the value in newspapers, and so it's tough to find a balance. But I mean, I think at the News and Advance, I think we do a pretty good job. We push hard every day to put out some good local content, and I think, like I said, we have a really good team of writers on sports and news. Particularly my boss, is pretty good at it.
Two final questions, and we'll do the whole dive into the newspaper industry later on. Talk a little bit about your interests outside of writing for college or for preps. I know you're a big Red Sox fan.
Yeah, if you're going to give me a runway to talk about the Red Sox, I might keep you all night. I
You got to get up
it's
early,
like my
not me.
Yeah, no, it's my favorite thing. This is like my favorite time of year, at least when they're in the hunt. This year they fortunately are, so I can enjoy it. But I do have some other interests outside of that. I think everybody has to have interests outside of what they do for a living, and I think so. Working in sports and covering sports, you have to figure out ways to just be able to get away from that kind of stuff. I actually like, yeah. Before I moved to Lynchburg, I wasn't the biggest outdoors fan, but I think moving here makes you one, and so I like going outside, like going outdoors, like going on walks on all of our trails, and runs on all of our trails around here in Lynchburg, because I think our outdoor park system here in Lynchburg is incredible. I think it's probably the best way that I'd like to get away, and I also like to read. I think that's probably the best way to get better as a writer, also, and it's also a good way for me to get better as a writer while also not consuming sports stuff. And so I generally, I'll read some sports books that are recommended to me, and I'll read sports books about some of my favorite topics. But in general, I try to stay away, just because I think that's another great outlet to be able to to get away from the grind of doing sports every day. And so I like to read regular stuff, and I say regular stuff like fiction, nonfiction, and just kind of because I think it helps you better your writing style too, as somebody who spends a lot of time behind the keyboard and is always trying to get better. I think read some of the best writers in the world is the best way to do that.
So if I dropped you at the library, what section are you going to first, and what book are you grabbing?
Ah, man, I'm probably going to go to the history section, honestly, because I think that's probably the best. Recently, I've been on a big kick on Netflix on some World War II stuff, which like I said, 10 years ago, the old Bryson would have laughed at this Bryson, but I think there's like something about getting a little bit older makes you so fascinated by that kind of stuff. So I would say probably definitely in the history section somewhere.
Do you have a shorter attention span to where you can't? And I don't mean this to be an insult, but you were talking earlier about people losing sight in the newspaper. If people sometimes they can have 15 seconds on their phone to where they might not be able to read, 6 columns. Are you a
Oh
fan of
yeah,
those bigger books, or because I mean I know Ken Burns when he writes about the Civil War or World War II or whatever it is. I think Civil
it's a
War.
big book.
It's a big book, real big book.
It's a Yeah, I'm no thick book guy. Let's be
Okay.
honest. I'm like I said, I'm a younger guy, so I also have that 15-second attention span. I'm a very much a big fan of TikTok and Reels, all that kind of stuff. It takes a good book to keep my attention, but it's something I do love doing, in my off time. But yeah, I'm not going to commit to a 500 page book. Ah, it's a lot of reading.
Final question. Like I said, we'll do this again down the road. Outside of the newspaper, what is your favorite oldest thing, if that makes sense? It can be a music group, it can be whatever you want, but what's your favorite thing? Maybe pre Bryson coming to the world.
Wow. Oh man, I mean, I would say I think baseball's becoming an old person thing. I would
Mhm.
say that if that counts.
Thanks.
Um, I would also say golf. I think we could do hours and hours on golf, and I would love to talk to you about that sometime. I used to work at a golf course, and I really got interested in that during college, and actually got pretty good. I shot in the 70s, a time or two. Obviously, do not do that anymore now that I spend a lot more time working.
But what if we
But
went outside of sports? What's that one thing
oh
that
man.
Bryson likes, whether it's a music group, a TV show,
Oh man, a TV
whatever.
show. I mean,
Whatever you want.
I grew up on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, which
Okay.
was actually before my time. It came out in the early '90s. I was born in the late '90s, and so yeah, I would probably say that that's my favorite. I have them all on DVD. I still watch it on Max whenever I get an opportunity to, just to put on some background noise. I would definitely say the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Okay. Good talk, and we'll do more of it down the road. Bryson Gordon of the News in Advance. We will talk to you down the road.
Sweet man, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you, Bob.